Hi, I'm Dave from Cosmia Festival, and welcome to this online event which is taking place as part of our programme for our 2020 festival. We're really pleased to be working in partnership with Kirklees Libraries to bring you great authors who all write about the end of the world as we know it, looking at climate change and apocalyptic fiction, and we're even more pleased that you can join us to enjoy this content. We couldn't have done this without our partners Kirklees Libraries and our sponsors the People's Meeple, who are Huddersfield's board game cafe. This event is one of many taking place across our festival period, so make sure you check out our website for details of all the other stuff we've got going on. That includes more author talks, creative workshops for young people aged between 8 and 17, board game events, book club talks and academic content. There is really something for everybody. Obviously, we'd love to welcome you to Huddersfield in person for our festival this year, but we hope that you can still have a great time with our online programme, and we look forward to seeing you in person in the future. Stay safe, enjoy the event, and we'll see you soon.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. So today we have with us Alice Broadway, who's written the Ink Trilogy, amazing books by the way, and I'm just going to start straight away. Hi Alice, thank you for joining us.
Hi, I'm Breen, thank you for having me. So I'm just going to introduce myself a bit and do a really short reading from the first book, and then I think we've got questions and we'll just have fun. We'll just have a nice time. Okay, so I'm Alice Broadway and it's my full-time job to be a writer, which is so lovely because that's what I wanted to be forever. But I think like most of us, I sort of thought that that was a dream job, as in a bit of a literal dream, like that didn't happen to normal people. And so it was only when my third kid went to school and I suddenly had time on my hands and was having a mental health struggle at the time. And I thought, okay, here's a challenge. Let's see if I can write this book that I've had in my mind for a while. So it's my first time trying to write a book, which meant that there were fairly interesting obstacles along the way. But eventually that book became Ink, which then became the trilogy. So Ink is the first, and then Spark is second, and Scar is third. And they've all got these amazing, beautiful covers. They are all foiled and glamorous, thanks to Scholastic. So I will tell you a little bit about the Ink trilogy. So it's based in a world where everything about you is tattooed on your skin. So all the good things, all the bad things, the things you're really proud of, the things you're very ashamed of, the things that you love people to know about, and the things that you wish people didn't know about. And it's a place that really cares about the truth, and it's a place where you can't hide. I will read just the first page or so of the book. So chapter 1. I was older than all my friends when I got my first tattoo. My mother loves to tell the story. I wish she wouldn't. At 2 days old, you're meant to get your birthmark, but I got sick instead, and Mum cancelled the ceremony. Mum's friend said, "You need to get her marked, Sophie. What are you going to call her?" But Mum told them she would wait until I was better. I would be named and inked then. She ignored their whispered warnings of what happens to babies who die unmarked. And so for 20 days, I remained formless and void, until one day my mother said, "Let her be Leora." And I was Leora. The word was punched with minuscule needles into my flesh, tiny letters that have grown with me for 16 years. We're not afraid of death. When your marks are safe in your book, you live on after you die. The life story etched onto your body is kept forever if you're worthy. When we preserve the words, pictures, and moments imprinted on our skin, our story survives for eternity. We're surrounded by the dead, and for as long as their books are still read and their names are still spoken, they live. Everyone has the skin books in their homes. Our shelves are full of my ancestors. I can breathe them in, touch them, and read their lives. But it was only after my father died that I saw the book of someone I'd really known. So in the books, if you live a good enough life, all of your tattoos are removed at the end and turned into a book that honours your memory. And Leora's dad has just died, and she's excited to see his skin book. But when she does, she sees that there's something wrong. And after that discovery, everything she thought she knew and everything she thought she could trust falls apart. So I think that is probably enough of an intro to give you a flavour of what the trilogy is.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to dive straight into the questions because this one I've been really wanting to ask about the tattoos, and I know you get asked a lot in your interviews if you've got any tattoos, and I know usually it's always no, and I just want to know, have you got a tattoo since?
I have. So yeah, when I started writing it, in fact, when the first one came out, I had no tattoos, so I was completely ignorant, and so all of the stuff that's in the books about tattoos came from doing interviews and going to watch various artists at work, which is so interesting. People are very generous when you ask them to share the thing that they're passionate about. I think people are amazingly open. So yeah, I went and said to some incredible artists, can I interview you and can I see you at work? And they were able to tell me things like, if they want to make it hurt more, they can. And that if they use certain words, like words that sound a bit violent, then actually people's sensation of pain increases. So, you'd be nice to your tattoo artist if you ever get a tattoo, I think is the thing. So yeah, I have now got tattoos. I've got my little dots, and they're quite a good example of the books actually, where people who don't know me will just see some dots. People who know me a bit, I'll tell you all. I'll say, oh, it signifies a significant date. But then people who know me really well know exactly what the date is and what that's about. And Leora, the main character, she would be able to, without knowing me, know exactly what it was about. And I've also had another tattoo that I had at the end of the trilogy, which I'm not going to show you now because it would be a bit unseemly, but it's I've got a magpie and a crow, and so if you read all three of the books, I think you will understand why I chose those, and they felt like a good kind of ending to the trilogy, but also good little courage symbols, I think, to have with me. Yeah.
Now, power and faith also play a big part in your books. What made you want to make these a central theme in your dystopian world?
Yeah, I love how when you're writing a dystopia, you get to make up the rules. It's really great, and that's where using something like a religious community or faith-based system is really useful. So one of the definitions of dystopia that I quite like is it's an example of worst case scenarios, and I think that the dystopias I like are where they've defined the problem really well, but the solution that they've come up with is really bad. So, in Ink, the problem is we want to know that we can trust each other. That's a really good thing to want in a society, I think. But I think that the way they solve that is a little bit sinister. I think religious narratives are quite good for something like this. So in religious community, it's very easy to say, oh, well, this is the right way to live because it's the way the divine being wants you to live. This is what's best for you. This is how to be righteous. This is how to win your salvation. It's also the way to be part of the community. It's also the way to be safe. It's also the way to be respected. And the great thing about religion is you can offer a kind of punitive consequence as well. You can say, and if you don't, something bad will happen. So maybe you will be punished in the hereafter. Maybe it will mean that you are a unrighteous soul, and so you don't belong in our community. And so I think that talking about religion is really ripe for that. I wouldn't say that that's what all religious communities are like in the world we live in, but it's quite easy to caricature them, I guess, and play with them. And actually, I think systems of power are all like that. You know, we see it in our own communities, our own politics, that, you know, it's easy to amplify what we see in our own society and make it much more threatening. So if you do as we say, we will keep you safe. That sounds really good. It's just whether you can actually trust the power to really have your own good interests at heart, or whether actually they want to control you, and whether they want their own safety and well-being before your own. So I think, you know, you see it in the Hunger Games, don't you, where you've got you know, the rich community who get to have a great time, who get to not have any of the difficulties of life, and who get to cause great harm on others. And it's in some ways it just makes it easier to write, because if you have a community like that, it almost writes itself.
Just going on from what Ruby just said about power and play, a lot of the times with dystopian novels, people say, oh, they're based on the future, but they're usually observations and criticisms of the present. Would you say that's the case for your books? Would you say they're a criticism of what society is like at the moment?
I think that's such a good question. I think for me, it's not necessarily a criticism. It's more of a playful, okay, what happens if? So what happens if we all know exactly what's going on in each other's lives? Which in the Ink series is what happens because everyone's tattooed. But in our society, we kind of know what's going on in each other's lives, depending on what we've shared on social media, what we've chosen to kind of curate as part of our online persona, I guess. But yeah, I think often anyone who's writing is having a little bit of a consideration about their own society and their own time. You know, I picked up the first dystopian book I read. I nicked it from my mum and dad's house, so I don't know if they're watching this, but you know, if they're not, don't tell them. And it's The Chrysalids by John Wyndham, and that is post-apocalyptic. You know, I think, has there been nuclear war or something like that? And it's all about, you know, we've got to have a very pure society. But he's also talking about what's going on in his own society at the time. And I think that writing dystopia gives you great opportunity to do that. I mean, my challenge would be now, so much that's happening in our own society feels like you couldn't even write it, because it's so wild, isn't it? You feel like, oh, anything I write would just be tame in comparison to the reality. Here we are living in a pandemic, and footballers know better about how to take care of people than politicians. It's kind of wonderful.
Now, in this series, everything about you is visible to see. Like, where did this idea come from? Is it, and how do you see this playing out in our own culture? Because with celebrities and everything, people want to know absolutely everything about them, and they have no privacy. Is that where you kind of drew that from, or where did that come from?
I think so. I find it really hard to know where my ideas came from, because they kind of, it's a bit like a soup in the end, and you forget what you put in it. But it kind of came from being really intrigued by how death affects life. And it makes me sound like the most morbid person in the world, but I was watching a documentary about ancient Egypt and about the way that they really honoured the dead, and that death was a really visible part of life. And I thought, that's nothing like what we do. We cope with death by hiding it. You know, physically, when people die, we hide their bodies, and we struggle to talk openly about death. We struggle to talk about grief. So a lot of it was inspired by thinking about, hang on, we're the only, as far as we know, we're the only creatures who know that we're going to die. Definitely know. And I think that affects our life massively, even if we try to forget about the fact that we're going to die. So I think that is one of the reasons people make beautiful art. I think it's one of the reasons that people will want to change the world. I think it's why people will want to find some sense of life beyond death, whether that's religion or whether that's building something on earth that will last after they've died. And I guess, so in ink, a lot of it's about, will you be remembered, and will you be remembered for? And I think that is maybe where I see things playing out in our culture. So yeah, it's social media. I think a lot of that is about wanting to be in control of the story that's being told about our life. I think celebrity is fascinating, with the way that lives are more curated than ever, I think, online, aren't they? And, you know, you've just had Kim Kardashian and do her, like, oh, it's so hard being lonely and turning 40. So I went to an island with my best friends and we had a party, and I think I turned 40 this summer. I didn't know me to go to an island. But, you know, if I didn't know that she'd done that, I would not care. I wouldn't have any sense of feeling kind of slightly cross and disillusioned by her. But I think we know so much more about people now, don't we? Whether we want to or not. And I think that can it can be a huge thing in terms of how we relate to one another as a society, that we feel like we own each other's stories. We feel that we ought to be able to control what other people see about us and what they think about us. And so when we get likes and we get comments and we get those little rewards for the things that we put online, we feel really valued. We feel like what we're doing matters. And the trouble is that we can't control how people perceive us. You know, I joined Twitter when I was a very devoutly religious person. and that's changed now. And so the person I was way back when, and I imagine the things that I tweeted about would be really different from the kinds of things I tweet about now. And if that was all tattooed on my skin, I'd probably want to be saying, well, actually, hang on, that was back then, and now I'm different, and you need to see that I've changed. And I mean, we've had that in the news recently, haven't we, with the woodworking show with the guy who had Nazi tattoos. I think that it was the right decision not to showcase someone with Nazi tattoos. But I just think it's super interesting how we want to be able to be in charge of our stories, and we want people to give us the benefit of the doubt. We want people to understand that we can change, but we find that really hard to believe about other people sometimes. So some of that is what the books are about.
Well, we've got our first question from you, from someone else, for you, and it's, can I ask what are the good parts of using religion as a backdrop to your dystopia?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the really positive things about religion is that it forms community so beautifully, that I think faith-based community is like a family structure. And I think that having something like that means the stakes are really high. If you're going to leave that community, then it's not just leaving a way of thinking, it's leaving a family, it's leaving friends, it's leaving your sense of meaning and being in the world. And so I think it's really helpful to have religion in those settings, because it helps us understand what people might lose if they follow their gut that says, hang on, this might not be right. And I think that there are many people who have been through that in their own lives, who've perhaps grown up with a religious faith and who have needed to at some point decide, is this for me? Is this what I want to live by? And if not, what's the cost of that? What would that mean? Yeah.
Now, obviously, dystopian is seen as quite a dark and morbid genre of story, but so do you find that while writing dystopia or being a dystopian writer gives you a more bleak outlook on the world, or do you try and find more optimism in it because you're writing about more darker things?
It depends on the day. I think that generally people who are writing dystopian, who are writing fantasy, are people who can get quite caught up in big thoughts, in big questions, in big feelings. A lot of the questions we ask when we're writing dystopia are huge. What would happen to the world if questions. And so I think perhaps there's a tendency within us all to be a bit more melancholic and a bit more like gloomy. Sometimes I find big picture stuff does overwhelm me. That if I look at the world, I do just think, oh, well, it is a dystopia. I'm living in a dystopia. What's the point? It's all a disaster. I think if there are some days where I just look at the news and I think, well, ecologically, we're ruining everything for the sake of economy and we're not caring for the vulnerable. But I think that for me, it's when I see my friends doing beautiful, good things in the world, that's what gives me hope. and then when I see small communities doing beautiful, good things in the world, that's what gives me hope. And that's what I love about Dystopia, that there's always someone who's saying, hang on, there's got to be a better way. And in the Ink books, Leora's not a classic hero. She's not a Katniss Everdeen. She doesn't know how to shoot arrows or anything like that. She would really rather stay at home and drink cups of tea and not bother anyone. But she goes with her conscience and says, actually, I think I can make a change, even if it's small, and it's worth doing that. So yeah, my kind of gloomy perspective on the world varies day to day.
The way you write your books, well, your writing style, it's very it's harmonious and brings about all these images and emotions. And how do you go about that?
I don't know. I wish I had a good answer for that. I think that when you're really enjoying the book that you're writing, and when it's the right thing for you to be writing, those things flow. At least they do for me. So the way the words feel works. The stuff I really struggle with when it comes to writing is thinking of a plot, thinking of the people's real desires. I am much more like Leora. I would like everyone to just be nice to each other and have cups of tea and all be nice. And so it's a real challenge for me to create conflict and tension and to raise the stakes and to come up with a story. Yeah, for Spark, I sent off my draft and I was like, here it is. And my editor came back and said, it's great. Oh, fantastic. Now, if we just work on actually putting a story into it, that would be really great. So yeah, maybe I'm wasting my time too much on, the nice words. But I think it's like anything, isn't it? We all have the things that come more naturally, and then the things that are more of a challenge. And so at the moment, I am reading all the books in the world about how to craft a story, because either I could go, oh, I find it really hard, I'm not going to bother, and give up writing, which would be a bit foolish, or I could say, that's tricky, maybe I could find a way to work on that and get better at it, which is what I would tell my kids to do. So we all learn, don't we? But thank you, that was a really kind thing to say.
It's true.
Obviously there's quite a lot of parts and different steps to writing a book. What was your favorite bit? Was it coming up with all the crazy ideas like the book after the person's died, or was it researching the tattoos? What was your favorite part of putting it all together and making it a book?
I really loved both of those bits. I loved the research, and I loved being able to imagine a world. It's just really fun, and you get to make up the rules, and it's so nice. I think one of my favourite bits was in the books that are little folk tales that each of the communities hold dear. So the first book is based in Saintstone, and the second book is based in a different community. And we hear the same stories, but from a completely different perspective. I loved writing those, and I loved imagining, okay, how could we twist this and make it into something completely different, but that feels like it was made with the same ingredients.
In your dystopian world, obviously there's two different groups. Say if we were to put you in your books, which group would you be in?
Oh, okay. So the two different groups, you've got the marked, so all the ones with tattoos, but then you have this little sneaky group of people who refuse to be marked. And I really love their mindset, actually. They are quite in tune with nature, and I quite enjoyed their perspective on taking care of each other and honouring each other in death. And it felt, writing it, it felt like a more chilled community. So I'd like that bit. I don't think I would like either of the communities in terms of having to obey the rules and maybe getting them wrong, because I am really good at obeying rules, but only if I really, really agree with them. Yeah. So I think I'd be grumpy wherever I was, I think, knowing me. Yeah, I'd probably just go and make my own house in the woods or something. Maybe I'll do that in real life, actually. It'll be fun.
Now, a big theme in your stories is conflict between individuals and society. Now, I think because everyone has the moment where they felt like it's kind of them against the system, whatever it is, if it's school or workplace, everyone's kind of felt like that. So where did that idea come from? Was it just from like, kind of, where did you feel that idea came from?
Yeah, I think in my own life, I'd been through a difficult period where I had to stand up for myself about something, and I did not like it at all. I found it completely terrifying, and I found it pretty traumatic to have to be brave. And I think that perhaps Leora was born from some of that. And I think with Leora, we see her growing in her understanding herself and her trusting herself. Like I said before, she's not born a hero, and I think very few of us are. We find ourselves in situations where we are called to stand up for what's right. And I think Leora does that by practicing small steps of standing up for herself. And I think for her, it's pretty painful. I think she loses a lot in the process. And I think she's held back by her fear quite often of what she might lose if she does stand up against people in power who are doing the wrong thing, or if she speaks up for people who are vulnerable, but who people think are the baddies, and why would you stand up for them? I think I like writing about someone like Leora because I think she matches up more with the kind of person I am, and more the kind of person my friends are, than the people who seem to just be naturally brave. I think some people are amazingly brave, but I'm definitely not one of them. And so I think in our own lives, we have to practice standing up for ourselves in very small ways so that we're ready to stand up in big ways when we are called to. So, the small ways might be saying, actually, I don't want to eat that, or I want to go on holiday somewhere else, or I think it would be more fun if we watched this movie. And if you're a people pleaser, those things are really hard to do, because actually what you want to do is just be like, yeah, great, whatever you think. But the more we do that, and the more we know our own minds and our own inner compass, then when we are called on to stand up for other people or stand up for ourselves, then I think we will have the courage to do it. and we'll have the courage to know what's right. So yeah, I guess ink is the kind of the dystopia for the small and scared kids rather than for the brave ones.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I think small, courageous acts snowball into bravery itself, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But in regards to obviously what's happening in the world now, would you say in the future you're ever going to write about, say, two groups that are one's infected, one's not, or anything related to COVID or anything that's current at the moment?
Okay, and Breen, I think you need to write about that. That's amazing. I don't know at all. I've not been thinking about, could I write pandemic into fiction? I've not been thinking about that. I think I've been avoiding trying to think about it, if I'm honest, because at the moment it's just living it feels enough. Don't you think? But never say never, because it's so ripe for this kind of fiction, isn't it? And haven't you noticed that that's the narrative at the moment? So there is a real us and them. There is there are lots of factions. That I don't know about you, but in the early days, I found myself getting really angry with people who weren't doing the things that I would have done. And it made me think, oh, I can see now why big divisions come at these important times, where people actually end up just doubling down into what they think rather than opening up and giving each other the benefit of the doubt. So, I mean, it would be easy, I think, in some ways to write about. But I also think perhaps our politicians are doing a better job of doing the creating the factions and creating the conflict than I would ever do.
Now, in these stories, especially in the first one, Leora, she, her and her friends, they all have to get their jobs when they leave school. There's ones that tattoo people and work in the government, and they're kind of given these jobs based on tests. Is it?
Yeah.
Roughly. Yeah. Which job would you like to have, and which job do you think you end up having if they're two different ones?
Okay. I would like to be a tattooer. I think that would be fun. I think that would be interesting. But I think I would be bad at it. I think if the commitment you have as a tattoo artist to just be like, yeah, I can do this. No worries. Like, I can't even write a text without deleting it 15 times. It would be a disaster. So, dream world. Yeah, I'd like that job, but I think it would be bad. Is it awful that I wouldn't mind being a flayer? So having the job of, peeling the skin off. I think it'd be interesting. I'm saying that having obviously no experience in life of doing that. I hope I never have any experience of doing that. But I think as the job goes, it would be challenging, interesting. Yeah, a bit disgusting.
Maybe.
But we'll go for that. Yeah.
So in regards to your writing, how long does it typically take you to, say, write a novel?
Yeah. The first draft of Ink took probably 6 months. And then the first drafts of Spark and Scar took less time because of deadlines. But then the editing actually probably takes as long for me. So when I write a first draft, it's more than me going, oh, right, yeah, here's the story. This is what I'm trying to say. And then the editing is the actual work of saying, okay, and now how can I say it so that makes sense to anyone else reading it? And I've, since writing the trilogy, I've just kind of gone, oh, because I think it's pretty intense. I think it was quite full on writing at that speed. And generally in life, I am quite a slow kind of a person. So yeah, since then I've been working at a more pootling kind of a speed.
Now, because of the current circumstances and the current events that have been going on, have you been able to like see any of those that have been going on in your book and realised, oh, I actually wrote that differently to how it's actually turned out to be? And if you could, would you go and write it differently, or would you rather it stay as how you wrote it?
I try not to think about whether I would rewrite the books, because I think I would rewrite them. I think I would change so much. And I would probably get so obsessed with all the things that I wished I could change that I'd be stuck in it forever. I do now and then think, oh, there's a horrible leader who wants to build a wall between who he thinks are the goodies and the baddies. Oh, did I make that happen? I hope I didn't make that happen. Yeah, but I wouldn't mind. Wouldn't it be nice if you could write and make things come true, and you could just write really great, cool things happening to really vulnerable people where they actually just get great lives and cared for beautifully? That would be nice, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Perfect world.
Yeah, I think I want utopia, don't I?
Yeah. You know, when you were writing your first book, did you have any idea by the third? Well, not when you've written the third, but did you know where you were taking the story? Because from my side, there was a lot of tears, things that I were expecting. So, did you know? Well, this is where I want my story to lead and end.
I didn't. No, while I was writing Ink, I didn't even dare to imagine that it would be published, let alone imagine that there would be a trilogy. So I didn't let myself think about what else might happen. But in the back of my mind, there was always a sense of, I think there could be more here. And I think I could see possibly what would happen if there was another community, what would happen if things changed. So yeah, no, there was honestly a lot of thinking on my feet, and I would do that bit differently next time. I would definitely try to plan the whole thing before running headlong and not knowing where I was going. But it made for a really adventurous writing experience because I didn't know what was happening either. So, you know, it was full of surprises. But yeah, it's definitely made me realise that actually, while I resist planning, that it's in the planning that you get to build the skeleton. And then when you're writing, you get to build whatever weird creation, Frankenstein's monster kind of thing that you want to make. So yeah, I'm much more committed now to planning than I was. Yeah. I've probably given myself away now. So if you read any bits, you're like, what was she doing? I didn't know what I was doing. That's the answer. Yeah.
Now, what are your favourite dystopian stories? Are they like from just what you've either read or watched? Because there are lots of dystopian films out there that aren't books. And have there been any books that you've read where you've kind of preferred the films, if you've seen them? Or
Excellent. Yeah. I so one of the things that got me writing for young adults actually was reading The Hunger Games and just loving it. I think it's an amazing achievement, and I think it's such an incredible world and such an excellent platform for conflict, but also such a good platform to talk about injustice. So amazing. I do prefer the books to the films of that, but I like the films. I also quite like books that have just a flavour of dystopia at the moment. I'm enjoying reading the Lockwood & Co series by Jonathan Stroud, which content warning does include fat phobia. But in terms of a world where there are evil ghosts and the only people who can see them are kids, that's a really good way to talk about people wanting to be in control and using the most vulnerable in their society to try and get everything nice and neat and safe. I'm a bit obsessed with the Nevermore series at the moment, which is middle grade, so younger readers. And I've just read the third one, Hollowpox, and I think it's turning into a dystopia. It's so clever. So you read the first one, and the main character, Morrigan, finds herself in Nevermore, which is the most magical place. And you're like, this is so cool. I wish I could go to Nevermore. Oh, I love it. And then by the time I finish book 3, I'm like, is this the bad place? And I love that actually what the author's doing is making us as the reader go through the same processes as the main character of, hey, this is so cool. Hang on, is it so cool? Is it? So I'm really interested to see what she does with the rest of the series, whether I'm just reading into it too much. I'm liking as well. I'm watching the Good Place with my middle kid at the moment. He's 13, and we're watching that together. And because actually I found reading a real struggle during the pandemic. I don't know about anyone else, but sometimes my brain's just not been playing when I've been sitting down to read. And actually getting stories in a more visual way has been much easier. And so something like The Good Place has been so good. And that just constantly is playing with the idea of utopia, dystopia, utopia, dystopia. And every time you feel safe, it goes, haha, not really. And I love it. I love a show like that is entertaining, is funny, is it passes the time really well, but at the same time me and my kid are turning to each other going, what is happening, and who deserves to be there, and what does it mean to be good? And like, that's amazing, isn't it, to get people asking philosophical questions while being entertained. It's genius, I think.
You mentioned obviously the books that you're reading and how it was from a perspective and taking the readers along with the ride. When you were writing, I know you said you didn't plan it, but as you went along, did you think, this might jolt my readers a bit? Did you define your characters and what happens to them? Anything to do with, with the readers in mind?
Yeah. The biggest thing actually was something I nearly did. So I nearly, in the third book, kind of ruined everything. I was really, really tempted to turn all the people that you thought were good from the first 2 books into baddies. and just say, actually,
Oh, plot twists.
what would happen if you found out a bit more of their story? What would happen if you saw them from a different perspective? Would you still like them? I'm glad I didn't do that in the books. I think it would have been too much, but I think it's an interesting question. I think I can be a bit binary sometimes. I find it easier to decide that someone's like the worst person in the world and there's nothing redeemable about them, because it makes it easier for me to not agree with them and to think that they're despicable. It's much harder for me if I then go, oh, I've had compassion on them now. Oh no, I can see things from their point of view. Oh, disaster. Because people are actually much more layered than we would like them to be sometimes. Yeah.
Now, with your characters, did you find yourself drawing characters and their personalities? Did you find yourself getting inspiration from the people around you, or did you just completely make them up out of your head, or are they based on the people in your life?
I steal quite a lot, actually. I steal names. So some of my friends' names are in the books, only the nice people. But Dan Longsight, one of my kids is called Dan. Dan Longsight is a baddie. But I quite liked it because I thought, well, it feels like a likable name, and I wanted him to come across as he's probably a good guy. But yeah, admitting that to my kid, it felt pretty bad. I definitely steal people's characteristics as well. So, there might be. Actually, there was a meditation teacher I saw on some YouTube video, I think. And he was just so like calm, but you felt like he was like totally safe and totally in control, but also you couldn't quite read him. And he is Obel. So that kind of character of, I really like you and I really trust you and I feel calm and safe around you, but I've got no idea what's going on in your head. That was the kind of character that, I just stole from a meditation teacher. So I think we do that all the time, don't we? Because it's just it makes it so much more fun to me when I'm imagining a character, to make them more human. It helps me if I think, well, what would it be like if so-and-so was in this situation? What would it be like if this person that I know really well was also facing this obstacle? Because we know, don't we, if we're reading characters that are just kind of caricaturish, and it feels a bit empty. So yeah, anything that makes your characters feel a bit more real, even if it involves stealing identities, I'm all for it.
Ruby, you should have asked that question at the beginning so we could have all been on our best behaviour for the next novel.
Yeah.
Oh, darn it.
I'm watching.
Next villain in the next series.
Yeah. What's up your name?
In regards to your in regards to your protagonist, would you say that's a reflection of mankind as a whole, where it's a whole a journey to, obviously it begins as not as courageous as you said, and she's not brave, but by the end of it, it's doing the right thing in the sense that obviously some balance is restored. Would you say it's a reflection of mankind, what mankind can achieve if we all take that path and, you know, take a deep breath and take a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think in many ways I do feel that, because I think if Leora can do it, any of us can. You know, she is not the one you would pick to save the world, but she had a really good go. And I just feel like when I look at the world, I often feel, I'm not cut out for activism or challenging authority or being brave or anything like that. I should just leave it to people who are good at it. But actually, I do think that the more of us who speak up for justice, who speak up for people who don't have a voice, then the more effective it is. But yeah, I also think that Leora is, you know, in a smaller way, she is that kind of little encouragement in us to say, yeah, you might be very, very small and you might not make a huge difference, but a small difference is still a difference.
Yeah.
Now, when you first got the idea for the series and for the story, was it just you were telling a story to your kids and you're like, oh, I can really work on that? Or were you just sat bored one day, you're like, oh, this is a good idea? How did that come about?
At the time, my kids were quite small, so I think they would have been terrified. You know, like, hey kids, stop CBeebies, I've got something to tell you. It would have been really bad. But yeah, it was much more. I tell myself stories all the time. I don't know about you, but I fall asleep and I literally, you know, like, once there was a girl who, and I wait and see what happens. And I'm constantly just having a little play to see what my imagination will do. And so, yeah, that was really what was happening with the creation of Ink. It was the willingness to allow the first thought, oh, what would it be like if we had a different perspective on remembering the dead? It was to say, oh, well, I'm not going to dismiss that thought. I'm going to let it simmer. And then I'm going to see if that thought breeds more thoughts. Oh, okay, I'll let those play together and see what happens. And I think for me, that's the way stories work. It's the one idea playing with another idea and letting it brew and seeing what comes of it. And I wish there was a quicker way, because actually that's quite a slow way to create stories. I wish there was a fast route to making it work. But for me, it's the slow fermentation that seems to be where the ideas become something useful.
Maybe in the future we can have our thoughts connected and written down for us.
Well,
Put all the hard work out.
Be right.
So nice. Although then people, maybe we would actually be confronted with too many of our thoughts.
Oh,
Maybe that would be bad. You know.
too many tattoos written down.
Also, my thoughts are so boring, and they would play so often. It would just be like, I had a cup of tea. Oh, I drank that cup of tea. It would just be that, basically. It'd be fairy tale. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're nearing the end of our live today. Thank you so much, Alice, for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I've loved it. Thank you.
If you can just stay there, and Kev will come. Thank you, Ruby, as well, and Dave. Yeah. Kev will just come in and he'll let you know about a discount for Alice's books. Kev,
you coming?
I'm jumping up and down and all around by the look of it. Yes. As you can see, there's the code is underneath. There you go. It's my camera. Is that I just played with my lighting. It hadn't worked, so you can just have to hear me. All of Alice's books are 20% off of our local independent bookshop in Home First. Read books. If you go there or online and use the code CFBROAD20, you get 20% off any and all of Alice's books between now and the end of December. And thank you all, and thank you so much, Alice. That was brilliant.
Thanks,
and we'll see you in the studio once we end this broadcast in 3, 2, 1.